I sat there frozen, my Bible still resting in my lap as the hymn swelled around me. The stained glass light danced across my hands, too soft to shield me from the sting in her voice. She's just the babysitter. Not loud, but loud enough. My granddaughter's baptism. And I was a footnote in my own family story. After burying my husband, after sewing through sleepless nights, after raising that boy alone, I was the help. A seat warmer. A whisper meant to be forgotten. But I didn't forget. Not then. Not ever. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The carved oak doors of Grace Methodist groaned as Claire stepped inside. The smell of polished wood and candle wax washing over her like an old hymn. She clutched her leather-bound Bible with both hands, knuckles pale, the cool brass clasp pressing against her palm, as though urging her to keep her composure. Sunlight streamed through tall, stained glass windows, scattering fractured beams of crimson and sapphire across the pews, splintering the sanctuary into shifting mosaics. She moved down the aisle slowly, deliberately, aware of curious eyes trailing her progress. The congregation murmured, an indistinct hum punctuated by coughs and rustling hymnals. Every step reminded her of the countless Sundays she had sat in this same sanctuary, back when Adam was a boy, his small fingers curled around hers during the children's blessing. Now he stood near the altar, tall and polished, father to the baby girl about to be welcomed into the faith. Claire lowered herself onto the polished front pew. The wood was cool against her knees, the cushion thin from decades of use. She set her Bible gently beside her and folded her hands, bowing her head for a moment of silent prayer. She hoped for grace, for strength, for the ability to hold herself steady under the scrutiny she knew awaited. A stir of perfume and silk announced Tiffany's arrival. She slid in one row back, the sheen of her designer dress catching the light. The younger woman leaned toward her own mother, lips curving in a smile that held no warmth. Claire kept her gaze fixed on the baptismal font, a marble basin crowned with silver, yet her ears sharpened, every sense taut. Then came the whisper, soft, barbed, unmistakable. "She's just the babysitter." The words struck with the sting of vinegar on a wound. Claire's breath caught, her shoulders stiffening. The syllables floated forward, not loud, yet perfectly pitched to reach the small circle of parishioners within earshot. A couple near the aisle exchanged a glance. Someone behind them stifled a nervous chuckle. The whisper was no longer private, it had spread like a spark on dry tinder. Claire's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. Her granddaughter cooed in Adam's arms near the pulpit, a sound of innocence so piercing it deepened the ache. She wanted to rise, to object, to tell the truth in a voice that would shake the rafters. Yet she sat frozen, lips pressed thin, every muscle in her body begging for restraint. Adam turned his face slightly, eyes sliding away as though he had not heard. But she had known him too long, too intimately, not to recognize the small tick at his jawline, the flicker of discomfort in his gaze. He heard. He chose silence. That silence, heavier than the whisper itself, crushed her chest with a familiar weight. Claire forced her mouth into a smile, though her cheeks trembled with the effort. She adjusted her scarf, smoothed the edge of her skirt, movements deliberate, practiced, the motions of a woman who would not shatter publicly. The organ swelled, calling attention to the altar, masking for a moment the lingering echoes of the insult. Her heart pounded in time with the hymn, words unspoken rising inside her like a vow. She whispered inwardly, barely moving her lips, so soft only she could hear. Not today, but soon. Her fingers curled tightly around the Bible, nails biting into the worn cover. She fixed her gaze on the minister lifting the child, water shimmering as it caught the light. Around her, voices joined in a hymn of blessing, but Claire's mind moved elsewhere, calculating, steadying, shaping resolve. As the congregation's song swelled, she felt the chill of the whisper still coiling in her ear. Yet under it, something else stirred. A rising clarity, a sense that humiliation could be transformed into something sharper, something inevitable. She sat straighter, shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes shining not with tears now, but with the faint glint of steel hidden behind them. The baptismal waters touched the infant's brow. The minister's words echoed, solemn and binding. Applause rippled through the sanctuary. Claire joined in. Palms meeting softly, smile fixed and graceful, but her heart beat with a private drum, one that promised movement beyond this sanctified space. And as Tiffany leaned back, smug satisfaction etched on her face, Claire turned her head just enough that their eyes locked across the pew. The older woman's expression was serene, almost kind, but deep in her gaze flickered something Tiffany could not yet name. The service continued, but in Claire's mind a door had opened. She had no intention of closing it again. The sanctuary had emptied to a hush. Only the faint shuffle of shoes in the vestibule and the distant chatter of families lingered, muffled by heavy doors. Claire remained in her place near the front, back straight though her body begged to collapse. The Bible lay closed on her lap, her thumb stroking the worn spine as if the familiar grooves could anchor her against the tide swelling inside. Sunlight filtered through stained glass at a different angle now, less dazzling, more subdued. The colors spread across the pews in long ribbons, fading as clouds passed. Candles on the altar sputtered, their flames shrinking. She stared at the marble font where drops of water still clung, catching stray beams of light like fragile jewels. The moment had passed. The congregation celebrated in the fellowship hall. Yet Claire sat alone, her chest tight, her ears still ringing with that poisonous whisper. She closed her eyes, but instead of silence came memory. The echo of tires screeching, a knock at the door. The hollow weight of words no woman should hear. There was an accident. Her husband had been late that night. The car crushed by a truck that slid across black ice. She'd been 34, widowed in a breath, left with a boy whose eyes mirrored his father's. Grief pressed her to the ground, but bills piled higher than sympathy cards. She remembered the whir of the old Singer sewing machine, the needle rising and falling under the dim glow of a kitchen lamp. Fabric scraps covered the table, pins scattered like tiny threats across linoleum. Adam slept in the next room, unaware of the sacrifices stitched into every hem, every button. Years of thread and strain had carried them forward. She had mended uniforms, tailored prom dresses, even pieced quilts for strangers just to keep the lights burning. Each late night had been both a trial and a vow that her son would never feel the sharp edges of want, that he would rise higher than she ever could. The ache of those memories blended with the sting of the day's humiliation. To be dismissed as a mere babysitter after giving everything was a cruelty that pressed down harder than any funeral bell. "Claire!" The voice snapped her from her reverie. She turned to see Edna standing at the end of the pew, her sturdy frame softened by a pale cardigan, silver hair swept into a bun that defied gravity. Edna's eyes, sharp even in age, fixed on Claire with a look that sliced past every polite barrier. "You're sitting here like the walls are closing in," Edna said, lowering herself onto the pew with a grunt. The wood creaked, welcoming the weight of an old friend. "What's happened?" Claire forced a small laugh, brittle as glass. "I'm fine. Just remembering." "Don't lie to me," Edna countered, folding her hands across her lap. I've known you too many years. You're holding something heavy, and it isn't prayer. Claire pressed her lips together, debating silence, but the image of Tiffany's smug face surfaced, sharp and unavoidable. Words clawed their way out before she could restrain them. She called me the babysitter. Edna's brow furrowed. Who? Tiffany. She leaned over, right in the middle of the baptism, and said it, loud enough for others to hear. Claire's voice cracked, shame bleeding into her throat. Adam didn't defend me. He just looked away. The sanctuary swallowed the confession, the words floating up to vaulted beams where echoes of hymns still lingered. Edna exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. After everything you've given that boy, she muttered, her tone thick with indignation. She turned toward Claire fully, eyes alight with a fierce glimmer. Then let her choke on the truth. The words struck like flint, sparking heat in Claire's chest. She blinked at Edna, uncertain whether to laugh or weep. For a moment, the quiet church no longer felt suffocating but alive with the pulse of possibility. Edna placed a firm hand on her friend's arm, her grip steady, grounding. You don't need to fight her with whispers. You've got years of truth sewn into every corner of your life, and when the moment comes, she won't be able to swallow it. Claire nodded faintly, though her heart thudded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The idea of truth as weapon stirred something fierce inside her, something she had buried beneath duty and endurance. Outside, laughter drifted faintly from the fellowship hall, muffled by stone walls. Claire sat in stillness, Edna's words reverberating deeper than the organ pipes ever could. At last she whispered, almost to herself, "Then it won't be today. But when it comes, she'll wish she'd stayed silent." Edna's eyes gleamed with approval. Somewhere beyond the sanctuary, a door slammed, echoing like a warning shot. The house greeted her with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the hollow stillness that seeps into corners when laughter and conversation have long since moved elsewhere. Claire hung her scarf on the rack by the door, fingers lingering as though the wool might anchor her. The scent of old cedar and faint lavender polish clung to the air, steady reminders of routines that had carried her through decades of widowhood. She moved toward the living room, her shoes muffled against the worn rug. On the oak desk near the window rested her late husband's ledger book, its black cover dulled with age. She traced the edges before pulling it closer, the leather warm from years of touch. That ledger was more than numbers. It was the map of a life once shared, and the life she'd held together alone. Claire opened it carefully, the spine creaking like a tired hinge. Faded ink filled the pages. Neat columns, cautious notes, modest balances that had grown only through discipline and restraint. He had left her enough to steady herself, but never abundance. Through careful hands and steady resolve, she had stretched it, managed it, coaxed it forward. What he left became seed, never squandered, always watched. Her eyes moved over the figures, yet her mind drifted elsewhere. Adam as a young man, carrying boxes into his first home. She had stood on the front steps, exhaustion cloaked in pride, knowing the down payment had come from her sacrifices. She'd handed over the cashier's check without mentioning the months of skipped repairs, the meals of bread and broth, the quiet calculations made alone at the kitchen table. He never knew the shape of the cost, only the blessing of the gift. The memory swelled bittersweet, pride in his future, sorrow for her present. She pressed the ledger shut, palms resting on its cover as though it were a holy text. On the desk beside it lay a crisp envelope from Grace Methodist. She had retrieved it weeks ago, set it aside, waiting for the right moment. Now she slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the card. Annual Stewardship Pledge. Its blank lines stared at her like an invitation, or a dare. Her pen sat ready, a plain ballpoint with the cap worn smooth. She picked it up, poised above the page, but her hand stilled. Images returned unbidden. Tiffany's glossy hair catching the light, the curve of her smirk, the deliberate cruelty disguised as a whisper. Just the babysitter. Claire inhaled slowly, the words still burning like acid in her chest. She looked back at the pledge card, the empty space waiting. For years, her donations had been measured, modest, careful. Enough to honor tradition, never enough to shift any balance of power. But today was not like other days. She circled a figure, larger than she had ever dared. The number stood bold on the page, startling even to her own eyes. She felt the pen tremble in her grip, but her resolve did not falter. That sum would sting her savings, would be noticed, would alter the ledger's quiet rhythm. And that was the point. Her lips parted, breath uneven. She pressed her palm over the card, sealing the ink with the warmth of her skin, as though binding the decision into covenant. Then, leaning forward, she whispered into the stillness, voice rough but steady. "Make this hurt count." The words settled heavy in the air, neither plea nor surrender, but command. Her prayer was not for comfort, but for impact, for weight. The room remained silent, yet Claire felt something shift. A faint draft stirred the curtains, carrying in the scent of damp earth from the garden outside. She lifted her eyes toward the window where the sky had darkened, clouds rolling in like unspoken promises. She slid the pledge card back into its envelope, pressing the flap closed with deliberate care. The sound of adhesive sealing echoed louder than it should, like the lock of a vault. On the desk, the ledger and the envelope sat side by side, the past and the future, the careful and the defiant. Claire leaned back in her chair, her pulse steady but her chest alive with a fire she hadn't felt in years. She imagined Tiffany's face if she knew, the shock of realizing that whispers could be drowned out by deeds. Outside, thunder rumbled low in the distance. Claire did not flinch. Rain tapped gently against the stained glass windows of Grace Methodist, a steady rhythm like fingers drumming on an old hymn book. Claire's heels clicked across the polished hallway as she made her way toward Pastor Mitchell's office. The pledge envelope, sealed the night before, lay secure in her purse. Her grip tightened around the handle, steadying herself against the tremor in her stomach. Pastor Mitchell rose as she entered, his round glasses slipping a fraction down his nose. His office smelled faintly of leather and tea leaves, lined with shelves of theological tomes and framed photographs of mission trips. Behind him, the rain streaked the window, blurring the oaks outside into watercolor smudges. "Claire," he greeted warmly, extending both hands as if to catch her weariness before it fell. "I didn't expect you this morning. Please, sit." She lowered herself into the cushioned chair opposite his desk, smoothing the folds of her skirt with deliberate calm. "I won't take much of your time," she said softly, though her voice carried an undercurrent of steel. She placed the envelope on the desk, sliding it forward like an offering. Pastor Mitchell adjusted his glasses, curiosity lighting his features as he broke the seal. His eyes flicked across the card, once, then again. His brows climbed. "My word," he whispered, the timbre of his voice caught between astonishment and reverence. "Claire, this is extraordinary." She folded her hands in her lap, gaze steady. "It isn't charity, it's remembrance." He leaned back, fingers drumming lightly on the card. "This would allow us to begin the expansion sooner than we'd dreamed. The congregation will be—" He paused, studying her. "Are you certain?" "I am," Claire replied, her tone carrying the weight of every long night she had spent alone, every sacrifice stitched into her son's future. "But I have one request." "Of course," he said quickly. "The new wing," she continued, steadying her breath. "It should bear my husband's name, Richard Caldwell. He gave much to this church in life. I'd like his memory to give in death. The pastor's eyes softened. Claire, nothing could be more fitting. Richard's service is still spoken of with gratitude. This would be a permanent testimony. Permanent, she echoed, the words settling in her like a stone dropped into a deep well. Pastor Mitchell nodded firmly. Permanent. For the first time that day, Claire allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The bitterness of Tiffany's whisper still lingered in her memory, but now it met something stronger, a countermove woven with dignity and weight. There was a knock at the door. Deacon Harris stepped inside. His lanky frame slightly stooped, but his eyes sharp behind rimless spectacles. "You sent for me, Pastor?" "Yes, Harris," Pastor Mitchell said, lifting the pledge card. "We'll need legal language drafted immediately. Mrs. Caldwell has given us a gift that will shape the church for generations." The deacon adjusted his spectacles, glanced at the card, then turned to Claire with something close to awe. "This will require documentation, signatures, proper filings. We'll see to it that everything is binding." Claire felt her pulse quicken. The word binding sent a shiver through her. She had lived most of her years tethered by duty, bound by sacrifice. Now, for once, the word held promise instead of burden. As Harris began to jot notes, Claire's gaze wandered to a framed photograph on the pastor's desk. The congregation gathered on the church lawn, faces bright, hands raised. She imagined another photograph years from now, the new wing rising behind them, Richard's name etched in stone above the doorway. A permanence no whisper could erase. "Claire," Pastor Mitchell said, pulling her back, "this will not be a small thing. Your gift, your husband's name, it will be spoken often. Are you ready for that kind of attention?" Her fingers traced the edge of the armrest. Attention fades. Stone endures. Harris looked up, his pen poised. "We'll draft the contract this week. You'll have the right of review, of course." Nerves fluttered in her chest like restless birds, but beneath them, a quiet thrill stirred. She had spent years dimming her light for others. Now she was etching her family's legacy into the bones of the church itself. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing Tiffany's painted smile, the dismissive tilt of her head. She could already imagine the Sunday service when Pastor Mitchell would stand at the pulpit, announcing the gift. She could see Tiffany in the pews, composure cracking, forced to applaud the permanence of a name she had tried to belittle. Claire's lips curved, not into a smile but into something sharper. Anticipation, almost defiance. Pastor Mitchell slid the pledge card back into its envelope, sealing it with care. Then it settled. Claire rose, smoothing her skirt once more, her spine tall and unbending. The rain outside had strengthened, drumming against the glass with a fervor that mirrored her pulse. As she reached for her purse, Deacon Harris spoke again, quietly but firmly. "We'll ensure it is legally unshakable. Once signed, nothing, no objection, no challenge, can erase Richard Caldwell's name." Claire's hand paused on the purse strap, the words wrapped around her like armor. She inhaled deeply, and beneath the scent of tea and leather, she swore she could already smell wet stone, as if the future was being carved in her presence. And in that still office, as rain hammered against the windows, Claire thought, not for the first time, how delicious it would be to watch Tiffany swallow this truth whole. The fellowship hall hummed with chatter and clinking silverware. Folding tables stretched end to end, covered in white cloths and dotted with vases of tulips. Children darted between legs, their laughter rising above the low drone of polite conversation. A buffet line curved near the kitchen, heavy with casseroles and cakes, while coffee steamed from silver urns at the far wall. Claire sat near the edge of it all, folding napkins with precise, unhurried movements. Each crease was deliberate, her fingers steady, though inside her heart thudded with a rhythm she kept hidden beneath her calm face. The scent of butter and sugar carried through the room, mingling with perfume and cologne, but Claire's focus remained sharp, distant. Across the hall, Tiffany stood in a circle of women, her laughter bright and ringing. She lifted her glass of punch, voice raised just enough to carry. "We've been so blessed with family support," she said, the words syrup-sweet but heavy with performance. "Truly, we couldn't have done it without them." Her gaze swept the room like a searchlight, landing briefly on Claire. The corners of her mouth curved, not a smile, but a claim of victory. The women surrounding her nodded, murmuring admiration. Claire smoothed another napkin, folding the corner with care. She placed it neatly on the stack, her expression unreadable. The sting of Tiffany's boast brushed against her, but she let it pass, like smoke. Adam moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. When his eyes caught Claire's, his smile faltered. He looked away quickly, choosing instead to fuss with the dessert table, arranging a tray that didn't need arranging. The avoidance cut sharper than any whisper. Near Tiffany's circle, two women leaned close, their words pitched in conspiratorial tones. "Look at that dress," one whispered, lips almost hidden behind her glass. "Straight out of a charity bin." The other laughed, hand lifting to cover her mouth, eyes darting toward Claire before sliding back to Tiffany with conspiratorial delight. Claire heard. She always heard. But she did not flinch. She folded another napkin, fingers moving with quiet precision. Her posture was straight, her face smooth, a mask of serene detachment. The insult was only fuel. Edna appeared at her side, settling into the chair with the weight of someone unafraid to claim space. She plucked one of the folded napkins from the pile, studied its sharp creases, then set it down again. "Your silence," Edna murmured, her voice low, pitched just for Claire, "is loading the cannon." Claire's lips curved faintly, a shadow of a smile. She did not turn her head, but her eyes glimmered with recognition of the truth. Her silence was not surrender. It was a gathering storm. She placed the final napkin atop the stack, aligning it perfectly with the others. Then she folded her hands, resting them on the table as if in prayer. Her gaze shifted toward Tiffany, still holding court with her glass raised high. Still basking in admiration built on performance and pretense. Claire inhaled slowly, letting the sounds of the room wash over her, the laughter, the whispers, the clatter of cutlery, the faint squeak of shoes against polished tile. Beneath it all, she heard her own breath, steady and purposeful. "Tomorrow," she thought, the words forming sharp and clear in her mind. "Tomorrow, it fires." Her eyes lingered on Tiffany a beat longer, not in bitterness, not in rage, but in certainty. The hall buzzed on, oblivious. But Claire's silence was no longer empty. It was the fuse. The house was dark when Claire returned, its stillness different now, heavier, as if the air itself carried the weight of her decision. She hung her coat on the peg, but left the light off, preferring the dim glow of the street lamps spilling through lace curtains. The silence pressed close. No chatter, no laughter, no organ music, just her own footsteps on old wood. She set her purse on the table and drew out the folder Deacon Harris had given her that afternoon. Inside lay the contract, thick with legal phrases, the pages cool beneath her fingers. She laid it flat and sat before it, staring at the black ink that could not yet bind her. Her breath hitched. In the hush, guilt began its whisper. Am I bending sacred ground into a weapon? The thought stung. For decades, church had been sanctuary, prayers, hymns, baptisms, burials. Could she use it now as a stage for retribution? Was this vengeance, or was it remembrance, cloaked in sharper cloth? Her chest tightened. She pushed the contract aside and reached instead for the small tin box she kept in the drawer. Its lid creaked open. revealing folded slips of paper worn at the creases. She unfolded one, then another. Texts printed, saved, tucked away like scars on paper. Tiffany's words stared back at her. Maybe Adam will finally realize you can't mother a grown man forever. She clings because she's got nothing else. Claire is more burden than blessing. Claire's throat constricted. She had read them before, too many times, yet each time they struck fresh. Her eyes blurred as though her own heart recoiled from remembering. She set the papers down, hands trembling. The legal contract lay beside them, edges sharp against the soft lace runner of the table. Her fingers hovered, trembling between tearing and signing. She pictured the act, ripping the pages in half, feeding them to the fire, watching the ink curl into smoke. The temptation pulled at her, surrendering to peace, walking away, no battles, no consequences. She could remain invisible, as she had for years. Her hand lowered toward the contract, her breath quavered, but then another image intruded, Tiffany at the reception, eyes gleaming, voice dripping with performance as she declared her triumphs, and Adam, her son, avoiding her gaze, his silence ringing louder than any applause. That silence had been her truest wound. Claire's jaw tightened, the smirk, the silence. Together they hardened into steel inside her chest. She picked up the pen. Her hand steadied as if guided by something beyond flesh and memory. She set the tip to the line, pressed hard, and signed. Each letter etched with purpose, her name curling across the page with finality. The scratch of ink on paper echoed louder than the clock on the wall. When she lifted the pen, she felt the tremor cease. The doubts did not vanish, but they no longer ruled her. What had been hesitation became resolve. Claire closed the folder, pressing her palm flat over the cover as though to seal it with her own heartbeat. Outside, the street lamp flickered, shadows stretching long across the floor. She sat back in her chair, the quiet ringing differently now. Not an accusation, but a calm after-battle. Her eyes lingered on the contract one last time. A whisper escaped her lips, steady and unshaken. Let the stone speak louder than the whisper. At that moment, a gust of wind rattled the window pane, and a distant clap of thunder rolled across the night sky. Claire did not look away. By midweek, whispers threaded through Charleston's narrow streets like smoke curling from chimneys. They passed from pew to porch, market stall to beauty parlor, carried with the ease of any story with just enough mystery to catch the ear. Claire Caldwell, widow, quiet, faithful pew sitter, had been seen entering Pastor Mitchell's office more than once. Some said she lingered. Others said she left pale, with papers tucked against her chest. On Broad Street, outside the florist's where baskets of roses spilled fragrance into the warm morning, Tiffany leaned toward her friend Patricia with a laugh just sharp enough to sting. "Poor Claire," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. "She's desperate for relevance, probably asking Mitchell to keep her busy folding bulletins?" Patricia smirked. Bless her heart. Behind them, Adam trailed, his shoulders heavy, his eyes rimmed from lack of sleep. He carried his daughter's diaper bag, shifting its weight without complaint. Tiffany's voice floated back to him like a wasp circling. "She's always chasing after scraps of attention," Tiffany added, sipping her latte. "Can you imagine how exhausting it must be to keep pitying her?" Adam let out a breath, low and tired. "Tiff, drop it," he muttered. "I don't have the energy." She arched a brow but said nothing more, content that her barbs had landed. That afternoon, Claire made her usual trip to the market on Broad, basket hooked in the crook of her arm. The stalls brimmed with peaches, okra, and sheaves of collards stacked high. Vendors called out cheerfully, their voices laced with salt air and familiarity. Yet even here, the current of talk followed her. Near the tomato stall, two women bent their heads close. One clucked her tongue. I heard she's been pestering Pastor Mitchell, begging for a role. Sad, really. Can't let go. The other sighed. Ever since Adam married that girl, Claire's been adrift. I suppose loneliness makes fools of us all. Their words might have sliced once. Today, they skimmed the surface. Claire adjusted her basket, selected 3 ripe tomatoes, and walked on, her face calm. Inside, however, a smile bloomed, a slow, secret satisfaction. They had no idea what the papers on Mitchell's desk contained, no inkling of the stone already being carved. Let them pity. Pity was the mask before awe. By the cheese stall, Edna appeared, tugging her cardigan close despite the sun. She examined a wheel of cheddar, sniffed, and replaced it. Then she caught Claire's eye. "Busy tongues out here," Edna said, voice dry. "They'll be chewing the same story till Sunday." Claire tilted her head, her lips curving the faintest degree. Edna leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Don't let it sour you. Remember, truth has a way of shutting mouths faster than fists." Then, with a wink that carried more force than any sermon, she moved on to the honey jars. Claire lingered a moment, letting the warmth of her friend's confidence settle into her bones. For once, she did not feel defensive. She felt armed. Later that week, Pastor Mitchell stood before the church board, Deacon Harris at his side, the contract resting in Harris's briefcase. Voices debated dates, budgets, logistics. The rain had stopped outside, but within the room the air crackled with anticipation. At last, the decision was made. The dedication would be held the first Sunday of next month. When Claire received the call that evening, her hand did not tremble as it had days before. She listened, thanked the pastor, and hung up. Then she walked to the window, where the last light of dusk painted the sky in streaks of coral and violet. Her reflection looked back at her in the glass, lined, silver-haired, steady. She pressed a hand against the pane, and the words rose in her chest, unspoken but fierce. Soon. The city might be gossiping about her desperation. Tiffany might be laughing in her circles. Adam might be looking away. But Claire knew. The date was set. The fuse was lit. The bells of Grace Methodist rang out across Charleston's cobbled streets, their tones rolling through the humid morning like a summons. Families filed in wearing polished shoes and pressed collars, the air thick with perfume and anticipation. At the foot of the church steps, Tiffany posed as though the world were her mirror. Her designer dress shimmered faintly in the sunlight, a swirl of pale silk that caught every eye. A string of pearls rested at her throat, deliberate, precise. When she caught sight of Claire approaching, she lifted her chin, her lips curling into a smile painted for an audience. Adam lingered nearby, his daughter balanced on one hip, his tie slightly crooked. He turned as Claire neared, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His arms circled her briefly, cold, quick, perfunctory. "Morning, Mom," he said before shifting away to fuss with the baby's blanket. Claire only nodded, her silver hair pinned neatly, her navy dress simple but clean. She carried no sparkle, no flourish, only her Bible pressed against her chest as she stepped into the sanctuary. The pews filled with murmurs, the rustle of bulletins, the creak of old wood. Pastor Mitchell ascended the pulpit, glasses glinting under the light. His voice carried clear and deliberate as he began. "This morning, we reflect on humility, on pride, and on what it means to lift others higher than ourselves." A ripple of acknowledgement moved through the room. Tiffany leaned toward Patricia, her laughter muffled but sharp. "Of all the Sundays," she whispered, amusement dancing in her tone. Patricia stifled a smile, their heads bent conspiratorially. Claire sat in the front pew, her hands folded neatly atop her Bible. Her eyes shone, not with tears, but with a steady brilliance, as though each word spoken from the pulpit was striking something already kindled inside her. She did not glance back, did not flinch when the whispers came. Her stillness was its own declaration. The sermon wound on, weaving scripture into parable, parable into reflection. "The proud man builds monuments to himself," Pastor Mitchell intoned. "But the humble build legacies that endure, not for their own name, but for what their name has given." From behind, Tiffany giggled again, unable to resist. Her hand brushed Patricia's, a gesture of glee. To her, the irony was too delicious. The congregation bowed their heads for prayer. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass, casting ruby and sapphire across the floor. The air hushed, heavy. When the amens faded, Pastor Mitchell did not close his Bible. Instead, he cleared his throat and straightened, his voice gentling but firm. "Before we depart, I have a special announcement." Every head lifted, the shifting of bodies, the collective intake of breath, the turning of pages stilled at once. Even the restless children quieted, sensing something unusual. Tiffany's lips twitched, expectant. She leaned forward, pearls gleaming at her throat, as though the words were meant for her. Claire did not move. Her hands remained folded, her eyes steady on the pulpit, her body still as stone. But inside, her heart thrummed with the hush before thunder. Around them, the congregation leaned in. A wave of silence spread, filling the vaulted ceiling, pressing down with anticipation. And as Pastor Mitchell drew breath to speak, the air itself seemed to hold its lungs. Pastor Mitchell's voice rang steady as he addressed the hushed sanctuary. "Today, before we go forth, I bring news of a gift. A gift not only of means, but of heart. A gift that will bless generations after us." A ripple moved through the congregation. Curious glances, raised brows, the subtle lean forward of bodies hungry for revelation. Tiffany's pearls caught the light as she shifted, her lips curved in a smile already forming into ownership. Claire's gaze never wavered. Her hands stayed folded, though her pulse thrummed beneath her skin. Pastor Mitchell lifted a folded sheet of paper from the pulpit. "Through the extraordinary generosity of Mrs. Claire Caldwell, we will soon begin the long-dreamed expansion of Grace Methodist." The room stilled. Then, like a sudden storm, applause broke. Hands clapped, voices lifted in approval. Tiffany's smile froze. Mitchell raised his hand, calling them to quiet. "The new wing will be dedicated in loving memory of Richard and Claire Caldwell. Their names will be set in stone above its doors, a testament to faith, sacrifice, and devotion." The air shifted. An audible gasp. Like the room inhaled as one, Tiffany's jaw slackened, her painted smile collapsing into a gape. Beside her, Adam paled, his throat working as though words might rise and choke him. Claire rose slowly from her pew. The congregation's eyes turned toward her, a sea of faces lit with admiration, some with awe, a few with shame at whispers once spoken. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her posture remained unbending, her gaze clear. She was no supplicant. She was stone-made flesh. Pastor Mitchell's voice swelled. "Richard and Claire gave quietly for years, never seeking recognition. Today, the church acknowledges that faith. Their legacy will shelter our children's children." The applause roared again, louder, fuller. A few congregants stood. In the balcony, a voice whispered reverently, "She's no babysitter." The phrase rippled like a new hymn, passing pew to pew, a correction, a revelation. Tiffany sat rigid, her face pale beneath the powder. Her hand tightened around the stem of her communion glass, the thin crystal trembling. Patricia leaned toward her, wide-eyed, but Tiffany didn't move. With a sharp crack, the glass split in her hand, red wine spilling across her lap like blood. Gasps turned her way, but Tiffany forced a brittle laugh, dabbing at her dress with a napkin, her knuckles white. Adam remained frozen, his palms pressed against his knees, his eyes darting to his mother, then to Tiffany, then back. His lips parted, but no sound came. Claire did not look their way. She lifted her chin toward the pastor, her tears drying into lines of light. Edna, seated 2 rows back, rose to her feet and began clapping with deliberate rhythm, her gaze locked on Claire. One by one, others followed until the sanctuary filled with thunderous approval. Mitchell gestured toward the side doors. After service, we invite you all to the fellowship hall, where the plaque will be unveiled. The service closed with prayer, but few bowed their heads fully. Anticipation had already carried them forward. In the hall, a draped cloth covered the bronze plaque. The crowd gathered, Tiffany lingering stiffly at the edge, Adam silent beside her. Claire stood near the front, Edna a steady presence at her side. Pastor Mitchell lifted the cloth. Bronze gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights. The Caldwell wing, in loving memory of Richard and Claire. Caldwell. The room erupted. Applause, murmurs, even a few cheers. Claire pressed a hand to her lips, her shoulders trembling as tears escaped once more, but her eyes shone like polished steel. From the corner, Tiffany's voice rose, strained and brittle. She can't. But the words faltered beneath the swell of approval. Children pressed close. Elders whispered blessings, and the plaque caught the light as though heaven itself had claimed it. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The whispers had been silenced. The stone had spoken. But when she opened them again, Tiffany was staring at her, eyes narrow, jaw tight, something dangerous flickering behind her humiliation. Claire's heart steadied. She had won the first battle. But the war, she realized, was only beginning. The dining room glowed under the chandelier, its light too bright for the heaviness at the table. Crystal glasses caught the shine, silverware lay neatly in place, and bowls of roasted vegetables steamed between platters of chicken and biscuits. The food smelled rich, but no one reached for it with hunger. Tiffany sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, fork clinking against her plate with needless force. Her dress, changed after the wine stain, was tighter than usual, the neckline severe. Her pearls still clung to her throat, though they seemed less luminous now, dulled by the afternoon's spectacle. Adam sat opposite her, shoulders rounded, eyes lowered to his untouched plate. His daughter gurgled softly in the high chair, the only sound in the room that felt innocent, untainted. Claire sat halfway down the table, napkin spread across her lap, movements calm, deliberate. She spooned peas onto her plate, sliced her chicken, chewed slowly. Her serenity drew more attention than Tiffany's fury, though she never sought it. The silence stretched, taut as piano wire. Every scrape of silver felt like a spark threatening to ignite the air. Tiffany's jaw worked, her lips pressing into a bloodless line. Finally, her control broke. "You humiliated us," she hissed, voice low but laced with venom. Adam's head snapped up, eyes flickering between his wife and his mother. His lips parted, but no words came. Claire set her fork down gently, folded her hands, and lifted her gaze to Tiffany. Her voice was even, measured, but it carried more weight than the chandelier above them. "No, dear. You did that yourself." The words landed like a stone dropped in water, sending ripples through the room. The baby stilled, her little fists pausing mid-air. Adam closed his eyes briefly, as though the truth had been spoken louder than he could bear. Silence fell, dense and absolute. Even the ticking clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Tiffany's fingers clenched the stem of her wine glass, knuckles whitening. She opened her mouth, closed it, then laughed sharply. A brittle sound that fractured against the walls. "You think this is your victory? A plaque? A wing? It's pity dressed as generosity." Claire lifted her glass of water, sipped, and replaced it without haste. Her expression was calm, her eyes bright with an inner certainty Tiffany could neither touch nor diminish. She didn't answer, and that silence, stronger than rebuke, pressed harder than words. Adam shifted uncomfortably, his fork scraping against porcelain. He looked at his wife, then at his mother. His face caught between shame and something darker. Recognition, perhaps, of a truth he had ignored too long. Tiffany's laugh sputtered into nothing. She stared across the table, her chest rising and falling too quickly, pearls trembling with each breath. For the first time that evening, her composure cracked entirely, the mask slipping enough for everyone to see the raw humiliation burning underneath. Claire dabbed her lips with her napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside her plate. Then she rose, smoothing her skirt with graceful hands. Her chair creaked softly as she pushed it back. "Thank you for dinner," she said, her voice warm, gracious, untouched by bitterness. "It was lovely." No one moved. No one spoke. She turned, walked with unhurried steps toward the doorway, the air parting around her like a tide. Behind her, the chandelier glowed, the table full of food gone cold. At the threshold she paused, resting a hand on the frame. Her silver hair caught the light, her profile steady, regal. She did not look back, but her words lingered in the silence she left behind. Some truths don't need repeating, they echo. Then she stepped out, leaving Tiffany rigid, Adam hollow-eyed, and the room heavy with a silence that had shifted from tension into reckoning. By the following week, Charleston hummed with a new story. On Broad Street, in parlors scented with magnolia, at markets and beauty chairs, the talk was the same. Claire Caldwell's name was to be etched in bronze, her generosity securing the church's future. It was not whispered in pity now, but declared in admiration. At the tea shop on King, two women leaned over steaming cups. "A wing, can you imagine?" one said, voice tinged with awe. "She gave more than anyone expected." "Grace itself," the other agreed, nodding. That woman carried herself with dignity. No fuss, no pride, just quiet strength. I suppose we all misjudged her. The tide shifted quickly. Invitations that had once passed Claire by now arrived in her mailbox with handwritten notes. Neighbors who had once nodded politely stopped to clasp her hand. Even the grocer tucked extra apples into her basket with a smile. Meanwhile, Tiffany felt the sting of absence. The circle of women who once laughed at her side grew distant. Their calls slowed, their chatter cooled. At luncheons, her seat was no longer the center, but the edge. She caught sympathetic glances, not for her, but for Adam, whose tired eyes and stiff shoulders carried a new weight. "Poor boy," one woman whispered at a luncheon Tiffany attended. "Stuck between such women." Tiffany heard. Her smile froze, brittle as porcelain. At church, the change was undeniable. After the service, congregants sought Claire first, their hands warm around hers, their thanks flowing without hesitation. Adam walked beside his mother awkwardly, nodding to those who praised her. Tiffany lingered behind, unacknowledged, her pearls feeling tighter with every step. One afternoon, Claire returned home with a stack of envelopes tucked under her arm. The handwriting varied, slanted, blocky, elegant, but each carried the same spirit. She laid them out on the table, their weight surprising even to her. Edna came over that evening, settling herself into the armchair with a mug of tea. "Well then," she said, eyes twinkling, "let's see what Charleston has to say." She picked up the first letter. Adjusting her spectacles. "Mrs. Caldwell, your gift will touch lives far beyond our own. My grandchildren will play beneath that roof, and I will tell them your name." Edna looked up, grinning. "Poetic, isn't it?" Claire's cheeks colored, though she remained composed. "People are kind," Edna scoffed. "People are truthful. They've finally taken off their blinders." Another letter followed. I never knew the depth of your service. Please accept my gratitude and my apology for underestimating you. Claire's fingers tightened slightly around her teacup, though her face showed only calm. Years of invisibility, of being dismissed as the babysitter, now unraveled with each written line. Edna leaned forward, stacking the letters into a neat pile. Do you see? It's not only about the wing, it's about you being seen, Claire, fully, finally. Across town, Tiffany sat in her parlor staring at her silent phone. Once, her afternoons brimmed with chatter, women eager for gossip and invitations. Now, the silence rang louder than the chandelier above her. She scrolled through messages, short, clipped, perfunctory. Nothing of warmth, nothing of allegiance. Her reflection in the darkened window looked harsher than she remembered, her pearls mocking her from her own throat. Adam entered quietly, his shirt loosened, his daughter asleep against his shoulder. He did not meet Tiffany's eyes as he passed, offering only, "She's down for the night." Then he disappeared down the hall without waiting for reply. Tiffany pressed her lips together, fury curdling beneath her humiliation. Back at Claire's home, Edna gathered the last of the letters and placed them gently in a basket. She looked at her friend, eyes soft. "Respect suits you," she said simply. Claire sat quietly, hands folded, the lines of her face lit by the lamplight. For the first time in years, the silence around her did not feel hollow. It felt earned. But as she lifted her gaze toward the window, her expression shifted. Beyond the lace curtain, a figure lingered briefly on the sidewalk, still, watching, before moving into the night. Claire's pulse quickened. Respect had come, but so, she realized, had resentment. The knock at the door came late in the evening, soft and uneven, as though the one knocking wasn't sure he wanted to be heard. Claire set down her teacup, her pulse quickening. Through the glass pane she saw the slumped figure of her son, his tie loosened, his shoulders heavy as stone. When she opened the door, Adam gave her a weary half-smile. "Hi, Mom." She stepped aside without a word, letting him in. The air between them carried more weight than greeting. He dropped onto the edge of her sofa, elbows braced on his knees, head bowed. For a long moment he said nothing, just rubbed his temples as if the act could ease the burden he carried. Claire settled into the chair opposite, hands folded in her lap. "You look tired." "I am." His voice was hoarse. "Work, the baby, and Tiffany." He exhaled sharply, lifting his eyes for the first time. "She hasn't stopped since the announcement. She thinks you embarrassed her. Made her look small." Claire's brow arched slightly. "I didn't make her look small. Pride did that for her." Adam flinched, gaze dropping again. "She says people pity her now. That they only talk about you." "They do," Claire said softly, with no boast in her tone, only calm acknowledgement. Adam's shoulders sagged further. "I came to ask you, to make peace with her. For my sake, for the baby's. She won't let it go, Mom, and I'm caught in the middle, every day." Claire studied him. The boy she had raised through hunger and grief sat before her, grown, yet still unable to lift his eyes. "Do you remember?" she asked gently. "What Tiffany called me at your daughter's baptism?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. "Do you remember what you did?" she pressed. Adam's lips parted, but the silence between them answered before words could. "You watched," Claire said, her voice low, steady. "You watched me be mocked, and you said nothing." Adam's face burned. He lifted a hand to cover his eyes, then dragged it down across his mouth, ashamed. "I know," he whispered. "God, I know. I should have said something. I should have defended you. I didn't. I was—" He stopped, the words failing. "Afraid," Claire finished for him. Afraid of her temper, afraid of rocking your perfect image of family. You chose silence, Adam. Do you see now how heavy that silence was? Tears rimmed his eyes, though he blinked them back, his head bowing lower. I failed you. Claire let the admission hang, its weight filling the room. She did not move to comfort him. Not yet. At last she rose and crossed to the window, pulling back the curtains slightly. The street outside was quiet, lamplight spilling across the pavement. She spoke without turning. Your father stood for me in all things, even when it cost him. I buried him too young, and since then, I have stood alone. But you, she paused, voice thickening. I didn't raise you to be afraid of truth. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the tick of the clock on the mantel. Finally, she turned back. Adam had his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with the weight of his own shame. She came closer, not to touch him, but to look down at him, steady and composed. I don't absolve you tonight, she said, but I don't close the door either. His hands dropped, eyes red-rimmed, searching hers. One day, Claire continued, her tone both promise and warning, you'll have to choose where you stand. Between convenience and truth. Between silence and voice. And when you do, Adam, I pray you'll remember the cost of looking away. He swallowed hard, unable to speak. Claire reached for her shawl draped on the chair, pulling it around her shoulders. The gesture was final, dismissive yet gentle. Go home, kiss your daughter for me, and think on what I've said. Adam rose slowly, his figure bowed, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry, Mom. She nodded once but offered no reply. At the door he lingered, staring at her as though wanting to bridge the gulf but unable. Then he stepped out into the night. Claire closed the door quietly behind him, her hand lingering on the knob, her eyes glimmering not with triumph, but with resolve. The war with Tiffany had begun, but the battle for her son's soul, that, she realized, had only just been declared. The door rattled beneath Tiffany's fist before Claire could even rise from her chair. 3 sharp pounds, then a fourth, more demanding than the rest. Claire set aside her knitting, smoothed her skirt, and walked with unhurried steps toward the entryway. When she opened the door, Tiffany stormed past her without invitation, heels clacking against the hardwood like nails on slate. Her perfume filled the room, sharp, aggressive. She spun in the center of the parlor, eyes blazing. So this is how you do it, she spat. Buying love, buying respect, buying your place in this family. Claire closed the door softly, her hand lingering on the knob until the latch caught. She turned serene, her silver hair glinting in the lamplight. Would you like some tea? The question disarmed Tiffany for a moment. Her mouth opened, snapped shut, then curled into a sneer. Tea? You think you can smooth this over with Earl Grey? You've humiliated me, Claire, in front of the whole church, the whole city. Do you understand that? Claire crossed the room. Calm as a tide rolling over stone. She poured hot water from the kettle left warming on the stove, the steam curling like incense. She set a porcelain cup on the table, her movement steady, graceful, unshaken. Sit, dear. Rage is exhausting. Tea helps. I don't want your tea. Tiffany's voice cracked, high and brittle. She slammed her clutch down on the table, rattling the cup Claire had just placed. I want you to understand. You will never matter to Adam the way I do. Never. I'm his wife. I'm his present. You're just... She faltered, searching for the word. Just the shadow he's too polite to banish. Claire finally turned, her gaze steady, her voice soft but edged with steel. I don't need to matter to Adam the way you do. She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving Tiffany's. Because he already knows who raised him. The silence that followed was heavier than the outburst. Tiffany's chest rose and fell, pearls trembling at her throat, her knuckles whitening where they gripped the edge of her clutch. "You think you've won," she whispered, her voice raw, dangerous. Claire sipped her tea, unhurried. "I don't think in victories, only in truths." Tiffany's breath hitched, her composure slipping further. She looked around the modest room, the lace curtains, the old rug, the framed photograph of Richard in his army uniform. Everything about the house spoke of endurance, of quiet history she could not erase. Her fury swelled. She grabbed her clutch, spun on her heel, and strode toward the door. The slam shook the frame, rattling the picture of Richard so hard it tilted on its nail. Claire stood still, listening as Tiffany's heels clicked furiously down the walk, fading into the night. Only when silence settled again did she exhale, steady and deep, like air released after holding for too long. She crossed to the photograph, straightened it gently, and let her fingertips linger on the glass. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but firm all the same. "This house has weathered more storms than she can conjure." The clock ticked on. Outside, a stray cat yowled, then quieted. The night resumed its rhythm. Yet Claire knew Tiffany's storm was far from spent. And storms, she thought, always return stronger when cornered. Adam returned home late, the sound of Tiffany pacing carrying down the hallway before he even hung his coat. The living room lights burned too brightly, throwing sharp angles across her figure. She stood in the center, arms crossed, pearls askew from the angry jerks of her hand. "You went to her house," she snapped, her voice clipped. "And now the whole city thinks she's the saint while I'm— what? The villain in some parlor tale?" Adam froze in the doorway, exhaustion heavy in his bones. "Tiffany." "No," she cut in, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached. "Don't Tiffany me. You saw what she did. Buying her way into their good graces, plastering her name on that church wall. And now she thinks she's won. She thinks she matters more than me. More than us." His jaw tightened. "She doesn't think that." Her eyes flashed. "Of course she does. And you're too blind to admit it. She's turning everyone against me." Adam's voice came out low, sharper than he intended. "No, Tiffany, you did that yourself." The words hung heavy. Tiffany blinked, her breath catching, but her pride snapped back like a whip. "So that's it? You're taking her side?" "I'm saying you crossed a line," he answered, each word weighted. "What you said to her, what you've whispered behind her back, what you let others laugh about. It wasn't just unkind. It was cruel." Tiffany stared at him as though he'd struck her. "Cruel? After everything I've done for you? For this family? You'd call me cruel because of her?" Adam shook his head, running a hand down his tired face. "Because of you. Because I let it happen. Because I stood there, and I said nothing. And I can't do that anymore." Her mouth parted, but no apology came. Only silence, brittle and jagged, filled the space. When Adam finally spoke again, his voice was hoarse. "I'll be at my mother's tonight." Tiffany's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Of course you will." She turned away, her shoulders stiff, her figure framed in the doorway of the dining room like a shadow refusing to bend. Adam didn't look back as he gathered a few things, the weight of shame pressing against every step. Claire was at the stove when he arrived, her house warm with the scent of onions softening in butter. She didn't startle when he came in, only glanced over her shoulder with quiet acknowledgement. "You're late," she said gently, as though he were still the boy sneaking in past curfew. I couldn't stay there," he murmured, setting his bag down by the door. "Not tonight." She nodded once, neither gloating nor questioning. She stirred the pan, added a pinch of salt, and set 2 plates on the table. He sat, his hands restless, picking at the seam of his jacket. The silence between them was softer than Tiffany's, filled not with accusation but with space to breathe. When she placed the plate before him, simple roast chicken, green beans, and bread, he stared at it as if the meal itself was foreign. "You didn't have to." "I know," Claire said, sitting across from him. "But you're here, and you're hungry." They ate quietly. The clock ticked. The kettle hissed faintly on the back burner. At last Adam set his fork down, his throat working as though he were swallowing stones. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words breaking as they left him. His eyes lifted raw, seeking hers. Claire studied him, her expression unreadable at first. Then she reached for her glass of water, sipped, and set it back down with care. "Forgiveness takes time, Adam." He nodded, shame pulling at his shoulders, yet relief flickered in his eyes. A door had not been closed. It had only been left ajar. They sat in silence again. But this silence was different, tempered by something truer. From outside the night was quiet, but Claire felt it, the storm gathering still, beyond her walls. Tiffany was not finished. And neither, she knew, was she. The church bells tolled in bright, clear peals, carrying across Charleston's rooftops as though summoning the entire city. Grace Methodist stood adorned with ribbons of white and pale blue, sunlight glinting through stained glass in radiant shards. Months of scaffolding and dust had given way to something new. A long hallway stretching from the sanctuary, its walls freshly painted, its windows gleaming. At the entrance, draped in deep velvet, waited the plaque. Claire walked slowly through the double doors, her steps steady despite the weight in her chest. She wore a simple dove-gray suit, her silver hair pinned neatly, her Bible cradled in one hand. With the other, she reached out, fingertips brushing the bronze as the cloth was pulled away. The Caldwell Wing, in loving memory of Richard and Claire. Caldwell. Her hand lingered on the raised letters, warm beneath the afternoon sun streaming through the high windows. For a moment she closed her eyes, and it felt as though Richard stood beside her again, solid and sure. The sanctuary filled with voices, applause, blessings, words of thanks rising like hymnody. Parishioners pressed forward, shaking her hand, clasping her shoulders. "God bless you, Claire. Your Richard would be proud. You've given us all something lasting." She accepted each with quiet grace, her smile soft, her heart both heavy and light. She had never asked for adoration, but now it came, genuine, unforced. At the edge of the crowd stood Adam. His posture was straighter than it had been in months, his eyes clearer, though still shadowed with the humility of a man learning to mend what he'd broken. When their gazes met, he stepped forward and stood beside her. Not behind, not apart. Beside. No words passed between them at first. He simply rested a hand lightly on her shoulder, the gesture small but steady. In that touch, there was apology, pride, and something like reverence. Claire's lips curved faintly, enough to let him know she received it. Edna bustled up, eyes glistening behind her spectacles. She seized Claire's hand in both of hers, squeezing until their knuckles paled. "You showed them," she said, her voice low, fervent. "You showed them all." Claire looked again at the plaque, the bronze letters gleaming as though lit from within. Her throat tightened, and her reply was a whisper carried only to Edna and the air itself. No more whispers now. The crowd surged with chatter and laughter, children darting down the new hall, their shoes squeaking against polished floors. Yet amid the joy, there was an absence, palpable, sharp. Tiffany was nowhere to be seen. Her once bright circle of friends had dwindled, their alliances thinned. The silence of her absence rang louder than her pearls ever had. Claire's gaze lingered on the doorway, half expecting Tiffany's silhouette to appear, dripping venom as before. But no one came. Only the light spilled in, wide and warm. Pastor Mitchell called for prayer, his voice filling the wing, giving thanks for sacrifice, for resilience, for a name that will endure. Heads bowed, murmurs of amen rose, and Claire felt the weight of years lift slightly, replaced by something steadier. When the prayer ended, the crowd drifted toward the tables of food, voices carrying down the new corridor. Claire remained a moment longer, her hand still pressed to Richard's name. Adam stood beside her, silent but solid. Edna hovered close, her presence like an anchor. And in that holy hush, Claire lifted her chin, her voice barely audible but firm as stone. This is only the beginning. The bell outside tolled once more, deep and resonant, a sound that carried far beyond the church walls.